the George H.W. Bush presidency from 89 to 93. President Bush is our fifth of 6 presidents we'll be looking at in Chapter 15 of the Jared book. Got a few pictures here, a few images that we're going to take a moment or two just real quickly to look at. Let us begin with the upper right-hand corner, the Rust Belt, right in here, the Great Lakes area, the Sun Belt. And this will come up in a slide a little bit later on. Probably one of the things that doomed him when he lost his re-election bid in 92 was he had promised to raise no new taxes. In fact, he had said, read my lips, no new taxes. Now, of course, the problem was that President Bush was not as strong a president as some of the others in the past, Reagan, for example, Nixon, on and on and on, and he could not resist the need to compromise. In fact, he should not have said that in the first place. He intended not to raise taxes, but the Congress, which was controlled by the Democrats at the time, kind of forced him to, well, forced him to is the wrong way. They didn't force him to sign a tax increase. But he had to compromise, and part of the compromise was raising taxes, and Bill Clinton used it, and it hurt George H.W. Bush, and he lost his re-election bid. Down here we have the fall of the Berlin Wall. Right here, right there, on the very bottom, we have an image taken from a video of Rodney King. He's the man on the ground who has been stopped for speeding, and he is being attacked by the police after he has attacked them. We'll talk about that a little later on. Manuel Noriega, right down here, one of the larger drug dealers on the planet who we took into custody. And here we're looking at a little bit of the Gulf War, I do believe, and then headline from the Gulf War. Okay, let's go to our first slide. And George H.W. Bush. There, of course, is a very nice picture of President Bush. And, of course, as I said a little bit earlier, and of course, there's a picture right down there. Read my lips, no new taxes. That really kind of hurt him. And, of course, when he ran for re-election in 92, he ran against the Clintons. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth or detail about the Clintons. We'll talk about Bill Clinton in the next video. But again, the Clintons are the Clintons. And whatever you think of them, they are, and when I say they, I refer to the husband, wife, Bill and Hillary, because they go hand in hand, like peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper. They are politicians. And of course, I've said this numerous times, being called a great politician is no way, shape, or form a compliment. Okay, so our first bullet, George H.W. had served 2 terms as Reagan's VP before he was elected to his own term in 1988. President Bush had a great deal of experience in foreign affairs, and he had served in the CIA. In fact, I think he was the head of the CIA for a short time. He had served in Congress. He, of course, served as VP under a very popular president. And again, he had a lot of experience in both domestic and foreign affairs, and there were a lot of challenges in both. But he probably faced more challenges on the home front than he would have liked. Military spending in the Reagan years meant less spending on domestic. I'm sorry, I'm back. I know you don't know I was gone, but I was. I got kicked off for a second. Military spending in the Reagan years meant less spending on domestic projects along with higher taxes and a higher deficit. That's not true. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't care. The person who wrote this doesn't have the vaguest idea what they're talking about. And it's twisting things. It is real simple. Let's take this step by step. Military spending in the Reagan years meant less spending on domestic projects. That's wrong. We spent far more money on social issues than we ever had before, and that's the reason why we had such a high deficit. Deficits are the yearly amount of money owed. At the end of the year, if you have spent more than you make, that's a deficit. At the end of the year, if you make more than you spend, that's a surplus. And we have been deficit spending for, I don't even know how, a century or more, okay? By the way, debt is a total number of deficits and surpluses added together. Okay, so as the third bullet says, military spending of the Reagan years meant less spending on domestic projects. That's not true. We spent far more money on social issues and domestic projects across the board. Again, not on everyone, but generally across the board than we ever had before. Higher taxes. Okay, now again, there were a few taxes that were raised under Reagan. He generally gets a lot of credit for cutting taxes, but again, that is for income tax. There were some taxes that were raised. Let's take a look at this bullet one more time in its entirety. The military spending, again, they're blaming military spending. The military spending on the Reagan years meant less spending on domestic projects along with higher taxes and a higher deficit. That's wrong. Did we spend a great deal of money under Reagan to rebuild the military? Yes, because of the pathetic shape the military was in after Jimmy Carter, after Vietnam, after the government gutted, after the Congress gutted the military. Okay? The spending on the military isn't why we had a higher deficit. Why we had a higher deficit was because we spent so much money everywhere else. And I will show you sometime before we finish this chapter, some of the numbers. Let's continue. Bush had promised he would not raise taxes, but soon had to again. Read my lips, no new taxes. That, of course, is a great, tagline. It's a great little bumper sticker. But the reality is that George H.W. Bush compromised and signed a bill that raised taxes, knowing he had said this. And by the way, the Democrats knew he said that as well. That's why they pushed for new tax hikes, so they can make him look bad, make him look weak, so they could defeat him in '92. And that's what happened. Let's move on to our next slide. Bush's domestic policies. Okay. We have a couple of things here. We're going to take a quick look. We have 4 of the bullets, his domestic policies. Bush faced an economy that was going into a recession. The recession was extremely short. It really wasn't that bad. Now, again, all recessions are bad. I mean, they're not good, but it really wasn't, by historical standards, an extremely long or painful recession. But there was one. Any number of reasons why you have a recession. Again, recessions are essentially again, this is not a textbook definition, but recessions are essentially a rise in the cost of goods and a rise in unemployment. I mean, there's several other factors. And again, when the economy is going really well, when it's really strong, you have inflation. And if you're not careful, inflation will get too high, and which means prices of everything are rising, and in some cases employers will have to cut back hours to let workers go because again they're losing a little bit of money, which then leads to unemployment going up, which then leads to other people being let go, and again that's what happened. It was again relatively short-lived. Excuse me. Reduced spending by the government, by businesses, and by the consumers caused a decrease in demand for consumer goods. And again, a recession means money's a little tighter. So by and large, consumers start to spend a little bit less, businesses start to spend a little less, which causes more unemployment, which again causes the recession to grow. Foreign competition led to even less demand for American products, resulting in more layoffs in many important industries like the steel industry. And again, we have been competing against foreign-made goods for a number of years at this point. Again, we're in the late 80s, early 90s, and foreign competition is outperforming America. For a number of years, a lot of our companies have been going overseas. In fact, there's a story that Ford is going to open and build a $1.2 billion car factory in Mexico, going to close factory here, and go create several thousand jobs in Mexico. Well, they're not doing it because Ford loves Mexico more than he loves America. They're not doing it because he all of a sudden hates whomever, okay? He's doing it because it's more money for him. It is a sound, wise business concept, okay? It's real simple. Mexico is offering him a better tax rate. Environmental issues are not a problem, and so it just makes sense for him. So this foreign competition resulted in Americans being laid off in industries like the steel industry. States in the Northeast, right over here, began losing people as people began to look for work, creating the Rust Belt. And the Rust Belt is a term referring to some of these cities in the New England, Great Lakes area that are closed, shutting down. Again, here's an example right there, where the factories are being abandoned, people are leaving them, homes are being abandoned or are shuttered, and they're kind of rusting, okay, like right there, hence the Rust Belt. Impact of geography on history. Unlike the 1970s, most Americans lived in the Northeast and the Midwest with its hot summers and cold winters. I'm sorry, I think I misspoke that. Until the 1970s, forgive me. Until the 1970s, most Americans lived in the Northeast and Midwest, in the Great Lakes area, New England. It had its hot summers and its cold winters, okay? The Southeast was considered too hot and humid, while the West considered too dry and too remote. But technology has changed this. Government built dams, making water available in dry areas. And again, some of this was discussed previously. Having a bit of trouble with my drawing board. Hold on. All right, I'm back. I'm sorry. I had a bit of trouble with my drawing board, and so I got it working now. Let me go back over that. Government built dams, making water available in dry areas, and I think we've talked about some of those projects previously. Air conditioning made it possible to keep cool in the South. Thank God for air conditioning, or here in the valley it would be unlivable. And construction of federal highways in the 1950s made travel from place to place much quicker, much more efficient. Combine those things, a deteriorating economy and the new technology, okay, combine the deteriorating economy in the production areas, people who had spent their entire life in the steel industry and the steel plants and the car factories and those types of industries, they were being let go, or their hours are being cut because we are now buying more and more foreign-made goods. They're leaving the areas. They are leaving the areas in the Northeast, in the Midwest. They're leaving them because of lack of jobs and lack of opportunities. And then you add that new technology, people are starting to move to what we call the Sun Belt. And I'll show you a map in a moment, leaving behind the Rust Belt and those decaying cities within the Rust Belt. Saw a couple images on the previous slide. So, summarize it, New England and Great Lakes areas, which had up until 1970 or so essentially been the main population areas of the United States. People are leaving those areas, which we refer to as the Rust Belt now, and again, that would be those states right there. They are leaving them and then moving to the Sun Belt, okay, again, right in there. Right here, people are leaving them because, again, people are buying more and more foreign-made goods, which means we have fewer need for manufacturing jobs. And again, this is the area where you have the bulk of the manufacturing in America. The steel and the automobile and all those other plants that produce all those goods we've been buying for decades. We're buying more foreign-made stuff, so fewer jobs are available. So people are leaving there, and they're coming to God's second home, Texas. They're going to Florida. They're going here and there and yonder, okay? Texas, Arizona. Why? Jobs. Why? Good weather. Why? Well, in the case of the state of Texas, case of Florida, the case of Arizona even, let me make that red so it stands out even more. In those three cases, great tax laws. Texas has no state income tax. We are fortunate to have thousands upon thousands of people coming to the state of Texas every year from other states, which increases our population, which means our representation in the Congress improves. And they bring with them very innovative ideas, technological know-how, all kinds of skills which make our state better. But anyway, get back to the topic at hand. People are leaving the Rust Belt, the lack of jobs, decaying cities, and they are moving to the Sun Belt. President Bush's domestic policy, let us continue it. I hate when I do that. I'm terribly sorry. There we go. Civil rights and civil unrest. Progress made in civil rights had been made, but the recession hit young African Americans really hard. You got to keep in mind, African Americans, Hispanics, other minorities tend to do less well in society for any number of reasons. We're not going to go into them. We're not going to look at that at this moment. I think we've discussed this previously, and we probably will again. And if we do discuss it, we'll discuss it in class, not on the video. But again, minorities tend to do less well in America, and we'll discuss those reasons later on. African Americans were hit pretty hard by the recession, even though it was a relatively mild recession, hit pretty hard by the recession in the late 80s, early 90s, and that caused a great deal of civil unrest. You have riots erupting in L.A. when a jury found L.A. policemen, and again, this refers to the Rodney King incident, not guilty for beating Rodney King, even though it was caught on tape. Now, the problem with this is, what happened was Rodney King was pulled over after a several mile long, 100-mile-an-hour chase. When King finally got out of the car, and King is a big man, 6'2" or 3, 240 or 50 pounds. He's a big man. He got out of the car and started walking toward the police. Now, there are two men in the back of the car. They did as they were told by the police, and they were not touched. As King had moved toward the police, he was tasered. Once, twice. And it took 2 taserings for him to go down. Even then, he was still quite belligerent. And so, as was L.A. police policy, as it was in most places around the country, they then attacked him in force and used billy clubs in order to subdue him. Now, did they go overboard? That's possible. I'm not going to say they did because, again, I wasn't there. I'm not one of them. But what you see here in this picture is just one scene out of a lengthy, several minute long video taken by someone who happened to see the event take place. What the media showed was about 30 seconds of him being beaten. They never showed where he advanced toward the police, even though he had been tasered. And so because of that and other evidence, the cops were found not guilty. And of course, the African American community went wild. There was night after night after night of rioting and looting in the streets of L.A. Thousands of people were hurt. 100 or more were killed. Billions upon billions of dollars of damage. Entire blocks of cities burnt to the ground. It was just massive. People were being attacked because of their skin color. There's any number of stories and videos that you can find. One particular that comes to my mind, a man by the name of Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, was pulled out of his truck and beaten severely while videotaped by a helicopter, a news helicopter. In fact, at one point, a young man, probably not a whole lot older than you, picked up this large, I guess like a concrete brick, slammed it on his head, and started doing a victory dance around him. And of course, the truck driver was on the ground, prone, beaten senseless. Then he has this large cinder block pounded onto his head. That kind of wanton destruction and mayhem, again, didn't resonate well with a lot of America. They saw them as being essentially punks, gangsters, thugs who were stealing anything they did where they were too lazy to work for. Now, whether that is true or not, and it wasn't true in most cases, but that was the general perception many people had with the LA riots. Okay, getting off topic, let's get back to this. ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, signed by President Bush, prohibited discrimination against the disabled in employment in public facilities. Everywhere you go, you will see ramps. To get from the street, the curbs have been torn down and ramps have been built. You see in every bathroom, public bathroom, larger stalls to accommodate people in wheelchairs. You see the handrails in those stalls so that way people can get in and out of the wheelchair. Just a few feet down from my door, you have two water fountains, one higher than the other. The lower one is, of course, for people in wheelchairs. Elevators in buildings like this, so that way people who have some type of physical disability, like a wheelchair, can get up and down the stairs more easily. And there's a lot of others. But this became law in the early 90s, and again, the Americans with Disabilities Act was designed to accommodate people with physical disabilities, like being in a wheelchair, to make public access more accessible, to make public facilities more accessible. I believe this is our last one. We'll wait for it to fully load up. It's getting annoying. There we go. Some of his foreign policy. 1989, U.S. invaded Panama and removed the drug-dealing dictator Manuel Noriega from power and put him in U.S. prison, where I believe he is still to this day. And here's a picture of the dictator Noriega. And again, this was a pretty bold move. You know, we essentially invaded an ally, a foreign nation, and surrounded his home, Noriega's home, and eventually arrested him and brought him back to America to answer to the crimes for which he had been accused of, drug dealing and other things. 1989, 1991, the Cold War comes to an end with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of East and West Germany. Now again, this takes place while George H.W. is president. Did he have something to do with it? Yes. Did Reagan? Yes. Did Carter? Yes. Did Ford and Nixon and go back and Johnson and Kennedy and Eisenhower and Truman? Yes, they all had something to do with it. I think we talked about this in our last video. Does Ronald Reagan deserve all the credit? No. Were there a lot of Americans who contributed? Yes, indeed. Were there people from other countries who contributed? Yes, indeed. When did it happen? Well, George H.W. was in office. Did he have as much to do with it as other presidents? Probably not. But he did kind of gain the benefit of being in office at the right time. 1990, the Gulf War was President Bush's great success in foreign affairs. The United States forces defeated Iraq and Saddam Hussein's forces and forced him to leave Kuwait. Kuwait is a small, very oil-rich nation, which is an ally of ours. It was invaded by troops commanded by Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. A UN force was put together. The United States led a group of countries, about 20 or so countries, I forget the exact number, who forced Saddam Hussein's troops to withdraw from Kuwait and return to Iraq. Now, a lot of people said that we didn't go far enough, that George W. didn't go far enough, and his fault, and blah, 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 that he didn't remove Saddam Hussein. But again, this was a UN operation. We dominated, of course, but essentially this was a UN, the UN called for this action. And the UN passed a resolution, this is what we want done. We want the Iraqis out of Kuwait, blah, blah, blah. Never was it said, we need to kill Saddam. Never was it said, we need to arrest Saddam. It was remove them from Kuwait, which is what we did. And the point of this is, a lot of people use that saying, well, you didn't finish the job. And a lot of people said when George W. Bush ran, well, you're going to finish the job your father was too lazy to do or too scared to do. Again, George H.W. did the job he was asked to do by the UN. Now, again, should we be working with the UN is another story altogether. But he did the job that was asked of the UN by removing Saddam and forcing him out of Kuwait. Finally, in 92, the last year of his presidency, because again, he loses the 92 election, President Bush sent U.S. troops to Somalia, which is in Africa, on a humanitarian mission to stop the starvation and the genocide. Unfortunately for him and for American troops, this eventually leads to the incident which we refer to as Black Hawk Down. Now, that happened under Bill Clinton's watch, but the troops were there. They were sent there by George H.W. Bush to provide humanitarian aid and to stop the starvation and genocide in that country. Somalia was run by warlords, vicious, brutal thugs, and the idea was if UN troops are there, and it was a UN operation, again, not just American, but we did send troops there. If the UN troops are there, if American troops are there, then they could restore some order and provide food and clothing and aid to the population of Somalia and then other places in Africa. It didn't work that way, unfortunately. All right, and this is, of course, we'll start our next video the next time we are done.